Hey guys, welcome to this extra special episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series today. What makes this episode a little bit more special is I'm not going to follow the traditional numbering system in this one because I've realized that I want to do a few things with the show where I spotlight a few sort of more interesting group builds. You know, often we see a bunch of really incredible eye collabs that come out, or a few builders come together and do some similar mock sort of collaboration, or, you know, a cool contest happens or something like that. And I'd like to kind of spotlight that sort of stuff because it's always really awesome when the community comes together and does that sort of thing. So this is the first of, I guess, I'm not sure what I'm going to call them yet, probably like the annuals. Kind of like you would get with a comic book annual or something like that. This episode will be a little bit longer. We're going to focus on 12 mocks in this episode because that's how many there were in this eye collab. And yeah, we're going to spotlight this really awesome collaborative build. And what that collaborative build was of course another eye collab, and it is another Sons of Makuta. So we're going to be covering 12 Rahkshi in this episode. I know you guys all love your Rahkshi, and I think these are some of the best. The reason I wanted to do this episode was because every single one of these really seriously blew me away. There's some incredible, groundbreaking stuff happening in all of these mocks, so much so that I wanted to do an episode purely on them. I was considering just doing another Rahkshi episode, but I was like, man, I can't do 12. I can't do 12 mocks for one Biss episode. So here's the special episode on that. Let's begin. The first mock that we have today is by VB and is called Son of Makuta Shapeshifting. So something you may not know about the Rahkshi is there were a whole bunch of other elements. Or not, I don't know if they were necessarily elements, because some of them, like shapeshifting, is not really an element. But the Rahkshi themselves actually had multiple different powers. So let's head on over to Biosector, or the old Bionicle wiki, and I'll read some of those for you. So there were actually over 40 different powers that they could have had. Stuff like fear, poison, fragmentation, disintegration, hunger, anger, weather control, elasticity, heat vision, illusion, teleportation, quick healing, laser vision, gravity, elasticity, sonics, vacuum, plasma, magnetism, fire resistance, ice resistance, mind reading, shapeshifting, darkness, plant control, molecular disruption, chain lightning, cyclone, density control, chameleon accuracy, Rahi control, insect control, status field, limited invulnerability, power scream, dodge, silence, adaptation, slow, confusion, sleep. That's every single one of them. Bam! So these eye collabs are really cool because they focus on some of those that we didn't actually get sets of. Some of them, like, some of the ones that were released as sets had their specific powers, but yeah, like I said, there were 40 of them. So there were a whole bunch of other ones that we never actually got as sets, or we have... we have the color schemes of what they look like, but we don't have as much about them. So it's cool that they're canonical, but they don't actually have a physical Rahkshi to represent them. And so this is what's awesome about that collab, is we can get some interesting takes on what those characters could have looked like. So yes, like I said, this is the Rahkshi of Shapeshifting by VB. So he's focusing on that specific Rahkshi power. So something that I love about this, and honestly, this might be my favorite of this collab, but I say that and then I'm like, oh, I really like that one and this one. So it's a little hard to pick, but this one really blew me away. The fact that this arm design kind of spalls out into this massive kind of flowing mess of tentacles and things and all that, as if he's midway through shapeshifting, he's about to turn his arm into something unique and cool. I love how that looks. That's such a unique look, and it's so beautifully done using a bunch of these ratchet sort of connector pieces, some of these bendier flex tubes that come in Technic sets, and they have the, they're used to get the pneumatic air to flow through all the sets and stuff. It's beautiful. It's incredible. A lovely, lovely design that he's done here. So unique. I've never seen anything like this on a Bionicle. Probably never even really seen anything like this on a non-Bionicle either. It's very unique and very cool. It's a great way to represent that shape-shifting design and concept. I love what he's done here. One little other addition that I love so much on this is, if you take a look at the torso here, there's a couple wires that we can see there on the torso, and I think that's just a lovely little addition. You can never forget that Bionicles are sort of organic, robot-y kind of guys, biomechanical, Bionicle kind of thing. And I love how that looks there, just adding in those little wires and stuff like that. It's very Bionicle-y, it's very robotic, it just looks really nice, and those wires just flow so nicely with the rest of the build here. It's really cool to see. Something else that's really cool to see is I love how all of the sort of dark blue here kind of flows very nicely into the head design on this mock here. I like that this mock doesn't necessarily have any eyes either, and that it is just this kind of mesh of teeth. Which is kind of sort of fitting for Rahkshi. I think that works quite well, and we'll see a bunch more of that as we progress through the other 12 Rahkshi in this episode. But yeah, I just love how that looks, how beautifully all those pieces flow into each other. There's no gaps there, it just looks great. Something else that looks great too is the spine design on this, using those sort of system pieces there, and kind of getting that slow angle for the spine, and then using a bunch of these different shaped sword pieces here. It's a really nice way to do that spine design. I love how that looks, and I love how this whole mock looks. really, really clever way of doing a Rahkshi, and a great way of representing that shape-shifting element. Really nice to see. Let's move on to the next MOC, which is by Jafer, and this MOC is called Son of Makuta Elasticity. So obviously his element is elasticity. If you don't know what that is, think of Mr. Fantastic. And on that, I love how Jafer's shown this. You know, the rest of the Rahkshi looks very much like you would see any other kind of Rahkshi. There's nothing necessarily too unique about it. But then he's got the very subtle thing where his arms are just a little bit longer and a little bit sort of more, elasticy. I really like that. I think, again, that's a really subtle way of showing the element, but another way that it very much also represents the element, even though it is just a little bit subtle. So I think that's very clever and very creative, especially because while the Rahkshi does have that power, I like that, it is still a Rahkshi. When we look at the official versions of the Rahkshi, their element wasn't necessarily hugely obvious just looking at them. But I like that, his powers still kind of come through here, but he still looks like your typical Rahkshi. So I think that's a clever way of doing that. And that's something to think about when you're building your own stuff too. Do you want the element to really sort of dictate the MOC, kind of like we saw with the last one? Or do you want it to be a little bit more subtle like we see with this one? Really clever part use on here. We take a look at the eyes on this MOC. This is actually using some berry pieces in pink or magenta. I don't know, man. There's a whole bunch of different colors of pink. It's really hard to know exactly what they are, but those berries there, little Lego food piece there, very clever way to represent those eyes. I think it's a great part use. I love how he's done that. And then, of course, the sort of Exoforce arms there as the open mouth also looks fantastic. I also like the really simple staff here. A lot of the other staffs that we see in this episode, people go quite ham-bun on them, but I like that Jafer's gone very simple and very simplistic there. It's very reminiscent of what the sets were, and I always think that's a good thing. If you're building a Rahkshi, you kind of tie it back a little bit to the set. But that too, we see, especially one of the MOCs that I'll come to later, has a massive departure from the original sort of Rahkshi look, and I think there's nothing wrong with that as well. You don't have to stick to the source material if that's not what you want to do. So by all means, take the Rahkshi concept and times that thing by 10, bring it in an entirely new direction because it looks great. But I think this is a great example of sticking to the source material. So good job, Jafer. I love what you've done. One other thing I love, I can't not mention it. Love how you've done the spine here using those Exoforce armor pieces and some of those funky spikes and stuff. Looks great. Really like what you've done. Solid work. Let's move on to the next one, which is by Patrick Biggs and is the Rahkshi of Weather Control. I love the kind of primordial, sort of savage look that this has. It's almost sort of slightly tribal. And I don't know, I like that because I take a look at this and I don't necessarily see anything that majorly dictates the fact that it's a Rahkshi of Weather Control, but the fact that he looks a lot more kind of animalistic than a lot of the other Rahkshi does, it kind of almost gives him this sort of interesting connection to the land almost. Like I said, tribal before, he kind of has that look to him that he's way more connected to the land than anyone else is, and because maybe, he's a little bit more savage and stuff, he's a little less kind of contained, and he's out living in the nature, and as a result he kind of has a better connection to nature. I think that's again a very unique and clever way that Patrick has shown the element in this MOC. At least that's what I'm seeing here. You might look at it and be like, I don't really see what you're talking about, Ben. But I don't know, I like that. And maybe that has something to do with the landscape that he's put underneath this MOC too. Always nice to see a little vignette like that. And I love as well how all the studs there, that sort of slight little trickle of water or some sort of liquid underneath him, those colors are reminiscent of the colors on his actual staff here as well. Really cool to see that, some nice little visual unity there. I think it's really cool. But yeah, again, I think that's a really unique way of showing off that element that Patrick's done in a really difficult to pull off way, but he's nailed it. I think that's awesome. One thing I also really like, and I can't say I've seen it before, maybe I have, maybe you'll be like, oh Ben, if you refer to episode 72 of the Bionicle Inspiration series, you'll see that you saw it there. But I've forgotten if I have, but I can't say I've seen this before. I love how Patrick has managed to flow these Exoforce limb pieces into those mixel joints there. That's such a smooth, beautiful transition. It flows so nicely like that. And it's super simple. It's literally just sort of attaching the mixel joints into the Hero Factory bones there. But it's such a smooth transition, and it's a way to kind of get that to start off a bit bigger and then end up quite small. I think that's awesome, and it's a design that's relatively easy to do yourself, so if you want to kind of copy a tail design like that, you can adapt this in your own way on your own MOCs, by all means. So I think that looks really, really cool. Patrick's done a great job with that tail and a great job with this whole Rahkshi. Nice work, my man. Let's move on to the next Rahkshi MOC, which is by Anthony Wilson, the Secret Walrus, and this MOC is Son of Makuta Sleep. Now, Anthony's kind of gone ham-bone. He's actually built 3 Rahkshi. I'll cover the other 2 in a hot minute. But this one is really cool. He's taken this idea of its power being over sleep, and and taking it in a really interesting, weird direction. So we take a look at some of these pictures here. He's saying that these things coming out of his mouth are maggot crater, which is terrifying and creepy and gross, but really cool. So I love that. And then he's also got all these like bile liquid stuff that's kind of going throughout his body and stuff here. I love how this guy looks like some crazy, freaky experiment that some mad scientist has made, and now he's ended up with a freaking Frankenstein monster Rahkshi. I think that's a really unique take on that. And the idea of it kind of relating back to the power of sleep, it could be the element of, you know, this Rahkshi is kind of like half dead, but it's got all this sort of elements and liquids and things running through its body, and it's sort of like a zombie Rahkshi, so it's sort of undead and stuff. It's kind of taking that concept of sleep and taking it in an interesting direction, or at least kind of the idea of like when you die, it's kind of a form of sleep and stuff like that. So I like that Anthony's kind of really stretching the concept of sleep in interesting ways, or at least applying what sleep would probably mean to a Rahkshi. I think that's kind of cool. So far we've seen some really cool ways that people have taken these elements. That's one of the reasons I love this collab, is how much they're thinking outside of the box. It's really, really cool. Anyway, let's touch upon some of the details on this. So yeah, maggot crater on the head there that are also posable. Terrifying, but super cool. I love all the sort of drool that's coming out of his mouth here, simply using some of these trans beam pieces here. Very nice, very, very nice. All these different tubes and trans-colored pieces. Really, really cool look. And it's awesome to note just how much system is used on this, but there are little bits of Bionicle parts sort of thrown throughout this mock, and there's a really beautiful flow created between all of those different pieces. It kind of, you kind of forget that you're looking at a more sort of system heavy mock. You know, a lot of the Bionicle stuff flows so nicely in with all of that. It's cool to see. So let's move on to the next mock by Anthony, which is the son of Makuta Fear. So kind of taking a look at the last one and then now taking a look at this mock, they kind of have roughly the same frame, but it's awesome how he's taken that frame but added a lot of new additions to it. You know, while it's still sort of the rough basic kind of proportions that are kind of copied across, Anthony's very heavily redesigned the arms and the legs and added new stuff. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at something, is if you are building your own mock, by all means you could entirely copy the sort of basic structure that the last one used, but you just kind of detail it up in a new fashion, or you add a different pattern to that, or you greeble it in a different way, which is pretty much what we're seeing here with the upper arms, the legs, and even the lower legs as well. They are changed slightly, but it still sort of seems to be roughly the same basic frame, but there is a difference there. And I love that. I think that's a great way to build multiple things and still have them sort of visually look very similar. I think that's really cool to see. So I love the pattern on the upper legs here. Very robotic, very cool. I love how that looks. And I also love the mouth design on this one. This is very, very reminiscent of the Mask of Light movie Rahkshi that we saw, the way that their mouth opened up, kind of like you would see on an Elite from Halo or something like that. It's really, really cool. I love how that looks. And the tongue too, well, the tongue is technically the crater if we're referring to the Mask of Light movie. Also really cool, nice to see that kind of pop of the pink and purple there. Really pops out and really fits well, and it is kind of creepy and unhinging, which is, I think, the look that he's going for here. It's really cool. It's also cool to see that most of that is actually just coming out of that octagonal connector piece there, the same one that's used on the hand design that we see on this mock. Really cool. I like how that looks. It's a really clever, simple way of doing that, but it pulls off a really unique and beautiful mouth design. Very, very nice, Anthony. Love what you've done. But, like I said, he's made 3 mocks here. So, this is the Rahkshi of Darkness by Anthony Wilson. Really like the sort of circular pattern that's going on there on the torso. Looks really unique and really cool. I just love how that looks. I also think if we're taking a look at the back of this mock here, the way that the tail part on this mock flows into everything else is so flawless and beautiful. You know, one of the problems with those tail pieces is, especially when you start to use the larger tail parts, it ends in a kind of funky way that I've often found is a little bit difficult to get to kind of flow into other pieces. But Anthony's done that in a really effective, beautiful way. So I applaud that. It's very difficult to do, and it looks flawless. I love how he's done that. I also love how he's done the mouth on this one. Very different to the other two, but also sort of slightly similar, but he's taken it in a new direction, which is really cool. It's very kind of worm-like. It's very creepy and terrifying. It looks cool. And speaking of creepy and terrifying, his tongue has a hand on it. That's terrifying, but that's a really cool looking design. I love how that looks. Nice work, Anthony. So we're halfway, guys. That's 6 Rahkshi. Let's take a look at the other 6. This one is by Rock Monster 2000, and this is Son of Makuta Mind Reading. So once again, thinking outside of the box on this mock, I love how he's done the spine design on this one. Instead of, normally the spine is where the spine is on the MOC. It's sort of up along the back. But here, he's taken these spikes and he sort of put them on the sides there. And then put something in the middle, which I think is really fitting and really interesting. Also a cool idea how these spikes kind of almost look like sort of nails or something. Kind of like people have been ripping open his brain and shoving nails in to hold together. Again, terrifying, but, fits the concept. And so, yeah, it's nice that those have a kind of, not actually a spike, it's more of a sort of pin or something like that. I think that's a clever way of doing it. And I also love that on the back he sort of has that brain looking thing in that trans-clear capsule there. Very fitting of the concept. Interesting that the brain is sort of more prominent on this one because that is his power. I think that's really cool. I also like he's got his little additional minion there. Maybe if he's got some powers of mind reading, he's a little bit smarter than some others, and so he's made some little minions to do his bidding. I think that's really clever. I think it's an interesting way of taking the concept. I also love the finger design on this, using some of those Technic engine pieces there. Interesting, I didn't even know that those would connect into mixel joints, but it's a really interesting finger design there. It looks really cool. And I also like the overall kind of hunched look that this MOC has. It's very sort of evil mastermind, which again is kind of fitting with the big brain thing. The head design, kind of just the way that it sort of flows in over the eyes and stuff like that, it kind of gives me like little nods to Brain from Pinky and the Brain, which I think again is really fitting because he's playing with the concept of mind control and mind, evil mastermind, Brain is an evil mastermind. And so I like that there's at least I see little subtle nods to that. That probably isn't an inspiration for it, but just the way that this character is designed kind of has that evil mastermind look to it. I think that's very fitting. And a really interesting way to take the power and apply it to a Rahkshi. Brilliant. Really, really cool. So let's take a look at the next Rahkshi, which is by BD and is son of Makuta Status Field. So I love how the spine is just this beautiful pop of color against a sort of basically purely black background. I think that looks really cool. It's a really interesting way of playing with the colors here. I love how that looks. And also a really interesting element to use for the spine here. I think, it fits well with this status field element design. It kind of looks like a sort of shield or something, kind of something like a ray shield from Star Wars or something, kind of gives me nods to that. I think that's really cool. And the way that these all sort of flow, and the fact that it almost kind of even flows into the head here. We get this slicer head with some little bit of blue color on there. I think it looks super cool. It looks like the spine flows into the head there. There's a really nice way that he's kind of layered these colors on the MOC. It's lovely to see. I think it looks great. And I think the staff design on this MOC is really cool too, using those trophies there. It's an interesting kind of look that it creates. I think it's pretty cool. Always cool to see more interesting staff designs, just playing around with pieces until something looks cool. Very nice. Let's take a look at the 9th Rahkshi in this collab, and it is by Joxon and is called Dodge. So Dodge is a weird power. I mean, anybody can dodge. I don't know how specifically that's a power. Maybe this one was just like really good at dodging and Makuta's like, oh god, what do we give Greg? Like, everyone else has a really cool like power set, but this guy, he's just really fast. Like, we already have a fastness one. Like, I don't even know. Like, what do we do with this? Yeah, your power's dodge, man, whatever. And he's like, yeah, I got a power. And he's like, he doesn't have a power. We'll just tell him that and make him happy. But still, I like that. The way that Joxon has applied the element of dodge, no matter how weird it might be, he's applied it in a really clever way. This foot design here, really clever, using these using these gully hook pieces in silver. It kind of looks like he's got some sort of funky, jumpy feet kind of thing. I don't know how to describe that, but to me, it looks like he's ready to kind of springboard up and kind of bounce around. It kind of looks like the prosthetic legs you might see on some runners in the Olympics and stuff like that. It looks like he's ready to spring up and dodge around and stuff. And that's the same with the kind of just general posing that this MOC has in the pictures. I think it's really fitting and looks really, really cool. And speaking of really fitting and really cool, I like how he's done the little staff design on this. Really simple, really small too. It's cool to see little smaller weapons like that. Really fitting, looks great. And speaking of really fitting and looks great, the spine design on this is also pretty cool. Cool how he's kind of got two sort of adjacent spines there. He's got the red spine along the sides and then this black one up along the back as well. Again, cool to see another take on the spine. It's very different from the others that we've seen. And it's also cool to see that this is a slightly smaller Rahkshi. Some of the other ones are a little bit bigger, used a few more pieces, but this one has a sort of smaller parts count, but still looks just as cool. So I really like that. Nice work, Joxon. Let's take a look at the next MOC. And this is the Rahkshi of Slowness. So again, a very, very interesting take and a massive departure from the original look of Rahkshi. This one is a more snail-inspired Rahkshi design, which again, perfectly fitting for the element or the power of slowness. He's turned the spine into an almost sort of shell, which I think again is genius, a really interesting way of adapting the basic concepts of a Rahkshi. And then he has it so that the head is that sort of awesome sort of toothed mouth effect, but then the arms are also that as well, and he's got all these freaky tongues coming out of it and stuff. It's a massive departure from the original source material, but a beautiful departure from the original source material. I love it. A really interesting way of applying that element, and you know, taking something from our world that's slow and then adapting it into a Rahkshi. I think that's great. I love too how he's got all these boat studs and dishes down here as sort of the slime trail that a snail leaves behind. I think that's a fun little addition there, even though none of that's actually attached. It's just a great thing, and it improves the overall photo quality. I think that's really, really clever. So yeah, an awesome mock there. Oh, and my apologies, I forgot to say who this was by. This is, of course, by Poor Disadvantaged. Great work, good sir. So let's move on to the Rahkshi of Teleportation, and this one is by Jack the Mad. So we've seen a whole bunch of concepts that take things wildly out of the original source material, or really heavily changing things, but for the better, as we said. This is an awesome collab where everyone's thinking outside the box. But what I like about this one by Jack the Mad is he's stuck very close to the original source material, and I like that. It's nice to see a few of them just sort of, you know, just being a little bit like some of the others. I think that's perfect. I also love too how he's used a bunch of these glow-in-the-dark pieces there. I think this would actually be really, really beneficial if he posted a fun photo in the dark, seeing how that looks, because it's all kind of concentrated in one area there, you know, with all the teeth and stuff that he's got in his mouth there. I think it'd be a little bit scary, a little bit cool. So again, always cool to use those glow-in-the-dark pieces on your mock, because then you get a whole different mock when you turn off the lights. Very, very cool. And now here we go, the final mock in this episode, which is by Red and is the Rahkshi, or the son of Makuta, Cyclone. So this might be my favorite, or my second. See, I told you at the start of the episode, I was like, this one's my favorite, and now I'm like, this one's my favorite. Man, it's hard to pick favorites, but I do really, really love what Red has done with this. The really, really cool weapon design, kind of like this funky spinning fan thing. Really cool. Really fitting, kind of very Bionicle-like. I love what that does. I think that looks so cool. I think it's very clever and very creative. And I also love how he's repeated all these Star Wars Ultra Build leg armor pieces, just for that visual unity, so that everything in the mock kind of flows nicely together. But on top of that, these pieces, especially with the way that he's layered them for the spine here on the mock, it almost kind of looks like the blades on like a jet plane turbine or something like that, which again is very fitting for this Cyclone thing, because it's a big old fan. It's almost as if, I don't know, it's just so cool. It's like every element on the mock in some way is reflecting this Rahkshi's power set, but on top of that, it just looks really sleek and really beautiful, and again, it's just very fitting of what a Rahkshi naturally looks like, or the Rahkshi that we would see in the Mask of Light movie. It's awesome. It's really, really cool. And I love the other little additions of turbines here on the shoulders and on the feet. I think that's really awesome. Really, really clever way to kind of continue across the power here. I think that's awesome. And I think the head design on this guy is very cute, very adorable, a little more system heavy, but he's cute. He's got little buck teeth. He's cute. I love him. And I also like the way that the belly's been done on this mock, it just being those two beams there. It's got the gap through the middle like that. It's really fitting. It doesn't need much more. It looks great. Speaking of looking great, that was 12 really awesome Rahkshi mocks by multiple builders here in this most recent iCollab. By all means, I will be probably doing more of these sort of annual special episodes where I spotlight a specific contest or collab in the community. If you have a contest coming up, or you have a collab that you have recently done with some of your friends, be sure to let me know. Be like, hey, Cossy, we just did one of these cool collabs. You should do a spotlight episode on it. Because you know what? I will. Because heck, if you guys are doing awesome stuff in the community, you're getting your friends involved, and you're having a good time together as friends, that's great. We need more of that, because it's awesome. Speaking of awesome, fantastic work, guys. You did a stellar collab. I freaking love what you've done. Nice work. So, that's it for this special episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. I will see you in the next one, where we will return to the traditional numbering system. And actually, I think that one is going to be on slicers and throwbots. Whoa! I never really tell you the next episode I'm going to post, but I'm doing that now. Probably won't do that again, because it's nice to have a surprise. But here you go. I'm telling you anyway. So, there you go. Enjoy, guys. See you in the next episode. Happy building. Bye for now.